The war had been raging for 3 years when Jake Martinez found himself stranded on the planet Cathara 7, with nothing but his damaged rifle and a half-empty canteen of water. The human fleet had been ambushed by the Velkari Armada in the outer rim of the Andromeda sector, and his transport ship had taken a direct hit to the engines, forcing an emergency landing on this hostile world. Jake crawled through the wreckage of his ship, coughing as smoke filled his lungs, and searched desperately for any supplies that might have survived the crash. He managed to salvage a medkit, some ration bars, and a small communication device that flickered weakly before dying completely in his hands. The planet's twin suns beat down mercilessly on the crimson sand as he stumbled away from the burning wreckage, knowing that the Velkari patrols would soon detect the crash site. Jake had heard the stories about what the Velkari did to captured human soldiers, and he had no intention of finding out if those stories were true. He moved through the alien landscape with careful steps, watching for any signs of movement in the rocky outcroppings that dotted the endless desert. The Velkari were a formidable species, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with sleek bodies covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors depending on their emotional state. Their society was matriarchal, with queens ruling over vast territories and commanding legions of warriors who would die without hesitation at their command. Jake had only seen Velkari from a distance during battles, and each encounter had reinforced the brutal efficiency with which they fought. As the day wore on, he found shelter in a cave system carved into the base of a massive cliff face, and he collapsed against the cool stone wall to catch his breath. His body ached from the crash, and a deep gash on his left arm had soaked through the makeshift bandage he had applied. Jake knew he needed proper medical attention soon, or infection would set in, but his priority was staying hidden until he could figure out a way off this planet. He rationed his water carefully, taking only small sips as he studied the cave system and planned his next move. The deeper tunnels seemed to stretch for miles into the darkness, and Jake wondered if they might provide a route to somewhere safer. As night fell, the temperature dropped dramatically, and he huddled in his torn uniform, trying to conserve body heat. Strange sounds echoed through the caves, making him grip his rifle tighter despite knowing he had less than a full magazine of ammunition left. Hours passed in tense silence before Jake heard something different from the ambient noises of the cave footsteps, multiple sets of them moving with purpose through the tunnels in his direction. Jake pressed himself against the wall and aimed his rifle at the tunnel entrance, his finger hovering over the trigger. The footsteps grew louder, and he could hear voices speaking in the clicking, melodic language of the Velkari. His heart pounded as shadows appeared at the tunnel entrance, and 3 Velkari warriors entered the chamber, their scales glowing with a soft blue luminescence. They were searching the caves, methodically sweeping each chamber with weapons raised. Jake held his breath and waited for the right moment, knowing he couldn't take all 3 in a direct fight with his limited ammunition. But before the warriors could spot him, a different sound filled the caves, a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the very stone itself. The warriors immediately stopped their search and turned back toward the tunnel entrance, their scales shifting to a deep purple color that Jake had learned indicated respect or submission. Another figure emerged from the tunnel, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. She was taller than the warriors, standing at least 9 feet, with scales that shimmered between gold and emerald green in the dim light. Her body had a distinctly feminine form despite the alien features, and she wore elaborate armor that seemed to be made from some kind of crystalline material. But what caught Jake's attention most were her eyes. They were large and luminous, shifting between shades of amber and violet as she surveyed the chamber with an intelligence that was immediately apparent. This was no ordinary warrior. This was a queen. The Velkari queen moved with fluid grace as she spoke to her warriors in their native language, her voice carrying an authority that needed no translation. The warriors gestured toward the deeper tunnels, clearly reporting their findings, and the queen listened with focused attention. Jake remained perfectly still, knowing that any movement would give away his position. The queen's gaze swept across the chamber, and for a moment Jake could have sworn she looked directly at his hiding spot. But she said nothing to her warriors, and instead turned to leave the cave. The warriors followed her out, and their footsteps gradually faded into the distance. Jake waited a full hour before daring to move, and when he finally did, his muscles screamed in protest from holding the same position for so long. He knew he had been incredibly lucky, but he also knew his luck wouldn't hold forever. The next morning, Jake decided to risk moving deeper into the cave system, hoping to find another exit or at least a more secure hiding place. He used his rifle's scope as a makeshift light source and navigated carefully through the winding tunnels. The caves were filled with strange crystalline formations that glowed with their own internal light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. After several hours of exploration, Jake found himself in a massive underground chamber that looked like it had been carved by ancient hands. The walls were covered in intricate symbols and pictographs depicting what appeared to be the history of the Velkari civilization. Jake studied the images, fascinated despite his precarious situation. The pictographs showed the rise of the first queens, the expansion of their empire across multiple worlds, and their encounters with other species. But what struck Jake most was a series of images near the center of the chamber. They showed Velkari and what appeared to be humans living together in peace, working side by side on some great construction project. Jake moved closer to examine the images, wondering if they represented some forgotten alliance or perhaps a different human-like species entirely. He was so absorbed in studying the pictographs that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him until it was too late. A voice spoke in accented but clear human language, startling him. "You are far from your crash site." "Soldier." Jake spun around, bringing his rifle up, only to find himself face to face with the queen he had seen the night before. She stood alone without her warriors, and her scales had shifted to a calm blue-green color. Her hands were empty of weapons, and she made no threatening moves. Jake kept his rifle pointed at her, but his finger moved away from the trigger. "How do you speak my language?" he asked, his voice rough from dehydration. The queen tilted her head in a gesture that seemed almost curious. "We have studied your species for many cycles," she replied. "It is wise to understand one's enemies. And yet you're here alone without your warriors." Jake said suspiciously, "What do you want?" The queen's scales rippled with colors. Jake couldn't identify. "I am called Zarakai," she said. "I am the youngest, queen of the Velkari Empire, and I have questions about your kind." Jake lowered his rifle slightly but kept it ready. "What kind of questions?" Zarakai moved slowly toward the pictographs, keeping her movements non-threatening. "These images," she said, gesturing to the ancient carvings, "they tell of a time before the current war when our peoples were not enemies. Do you know of this history?" Jake shook his head. "I've never seen or heard anything about humans and Velkari being allies. Our war started 3 years ago when your empire attacked our colony world." Zarakai's scales flashed with a color Jake interpreted as surprise or confusion. "Is that what your leaders told you?" she asked, "that we initiated the conflict?" Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. "Are you saying that's not true?" The queen turned to face him fully, and her eyes seemed to hold genuine emotion. "The truth is rarely simple, soldier," she said. "But I have discovered things in my research, things that suggest both our peoples have been deceived about the origins of this war." Before Jake could respond, Zarakai held up a hand. "I did not come here to debate politics," she said. "I came because I witnessed you in this chamber last night, studying these same images with fascination rather than destroying them as your military doctrine would suggest. You showed curiosity about my people's history, and that is something I have never seen from a human soldier before." Jake felt uncomfortable under her intense gaze. "I was just looking," he said defensively. "It doesn't mean anything." Zarakai's scales shifted to a warm golden color. "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps it means you are capable of seeing my people as more than just enemies to be destroyed." She moved closer, and Jake fought the urge to step back. "You are injured," she observed, looking at his bandaged arm, "and you have limited supplies. You will not survive long in these caves alone." "I don't need your help," Jake said, though even he could hear how weak the protest sounded. The queen's expression, which was already alien, became somehow more complex. "No," she agreed, "but you need someone's help, and I need answers that only a human can provide." "What kind of answers?" Jake asked warily. Zarakai gestured to the pictographs again. "These images were created thousands of cycles ago by the first queens of my people," she explained. "They speak of a great alliance between Velkari and another species, one that brought prosperity to both peoples. But the records of this alliance were lost during a catastrophic event. that nearly destroyed our civilization. I have spent years searching for the truth, and my research has led me to believe that the allied species in these images were your ancestors. Jake looked at the pictographs with new eyes. That's impossible, he said. Humanity didn't have space travel thousands of years ago. We've only been exploring beyond our solar system for a few centuries. Zarakai's scales rippled. Thoughtfully, time is measured differently across the galaxy. She said, what you call thousands of years may align differently with your own historical records. But the evidence is here in these caves and in ruins scattered across multiple worlds. She turned back to Jake. I believe our peoples were meant to be allies, not enemies, and I believe someone or something engineered this war to keep us apart. Jake wanted to dismiss her words as propaganda, but something in her tone made him hesitate. Even if that's true, he said, what difference does it make now? Thousands of soldiers on both sides are already dead. The war is real regardless of how it started. Zarakai's scales darkened. You are correct, she said sadly. The war is very real, but that does not mean it cannot be stopped. If I can prove the truth about our shared history, I may be able to convince the Council of Queens to pursue peace, but I need help from someone who understands human culture and thinking. She looked at Jake directly. I need your help, soldier. Jake laughed bitterly. You want me to help you end the war? I'm nobody. I'm just a basic infantry soldier who got lucky enough to survive a crash. Why would anyone listen to me? Because Zarakai said you are here, and you have already shown me that humans are capable of more than just destruction. Last night, when you studied these pictographs, you demonstrated curiosity, respect for ancient knowledge. Those qualities are what I need, not military rank or political power. Jake studied the alien queen, trying to determine if this was some elaborate trick. What exactly would I have to do? He asked. Zarakai moved to a section of the wall that Jake hadn't examined yet. There are 3 ancient sites scattered across this planet, she explained. Each contains fragments of the historical records I seek. I have explored 2 of them, but the third is located in human-controlled territory. Cannot approach it without being killed on sight. But you could. Jake shook his head. I crashed in the middle of nowhere. I have no way to contact human forces and no way to get to any controlled territory. You do now, Zarakai said. I have a ship concealed in the mountains 3 days' journey from here. We could reach human territory within a week if we travel together. And if you betray me the moment we reach your ship, Jake asked, then you will have made a foolish choice to trust me. Zarakai replied, but I give you my word as a queen of Velkari that I mean you no harm. I seek only the truth. Jake considered his options, which were extremely limited. He could refuse and try to survive alone in the caves until he eventually died of starvation or infection. He could take a chance on this alien queen who seemed genuinely interested in ending the war, against his better judgment. Jake lowered his rifle completely. All right, he said, I'll help you. But if this turns out to be a trick, if you're leading me into some kind of trap, I'll make sure you regret it. Zarakai's scales brightened to a warm gold color. I would expect nothing less from a warrior, she said. Come, let me treat your wound properly, and we will begin our journey. Over the next 3 days, Jake learned more about the Velkari than he had learned in 3 years of fighting. The Zarakai proved to be an attentive companion, sharing food from her supplies and using her people's advanced medical technology to heal his injured arm. They traveled through the cave systems by day and rested during the hottest hours when the surface became too dangerous. During their rest periods, Zarakai told Jake about Velkari society and culture. She explained that queens were chosen not by birth, but by a combination of intelligence, strength, and the ability to bond with the crystalline structures that grew naturally on Velkari worlds. These crystals, she explained, were semi-sentient, and they formed a kind of collective consciousness that guided the queens in their decisions. The crystals hold the memories of our ancestors, Zarakai said as they rested in a small cave. They allow us to learn from the past and avoid repeating the mistakes of those who came before. That's why I find the gap in our historical records so troubling. Someone deliberately removed knowledge of the human alliance, and I want to know why. Jake listened, fascinated despite himself. Your scales, he said. They change colors based on your emotions. Right, Zarakai looked at her arm where the scales shifted from blue to greens. She replied, "It is difficult for Velkari to lie because our true feelings are always visible to those who know how to read them. What do the different colors mean?" Jake asked. Zarakai considered. "The question blue typically indicates calm or thoughtfulness," she said. "Green represents curiosity or interest. Gold is happiness or contentment. Purple shows respect or submission to authority. Red is anger and black is fear or distress." "What about that color?" Jake asked, pointing to a patch of scales on her neck that shimmered with an unusual pinkish hue. Zarakai's scales immediately shifted to a darker blue and she looked away. "That is a private color," she said quietly. "It is not appropriate to discuss." Jake felt like he had stumbled onto something personal, and he decided not to press the issue. As they traveled, Jake also shared stories about human culture and Earth. He told Zarakai about oceans and forests, concepts that were foreign to her since Velkari. Worlds were mostly desert and crystalline formations. She was particularly fascinated by the concept of rainwater falling from the sky. She said wonderingly, "That must be extraordinary to witness." Jake smiled. "It's pretty common actually," he said. "Sometimes people complain about it when it rains too much." Zarakai's scales flickered with amusement. "Your people have so much water that they complain about it," she said. "Yet you fight wars over resources. Humans are complicated." Jake admitted. On the third day, they emerged from the cave system into the foothills of a mountain range. Zarakai led Jake to a concealed hangar, carved into the mountainside where her ship waited. The vessel was sleek and elegant, built from the same crystalline material as her armor. It hummed with energy as they approached, responding to Zarakai's presence. Jake felt a moment of panic as they boarded, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake trusting the alien queen. But Zarakai simply gestured to a seat in the cockpit and began preparing the ship for launch. The flight through space was unlike anything Jake had experienced in human vessels. The Velkari ship moved with fluid grace, responding almost intuitively to Zarakai's commands. Within hours they were approaching the coordinates Zarakai had provided for the third ancient site. But as they drew closer, proximity alarms began blaring. 3 human patrol ships appeared on the scanners, moving to intercept. Jake's heart sank as he realized they were about to be fired upon. Zarakai looked at him calmly. "I believe this is where you prove useful, soldier," she said. "Contact your people. Tell them we come in peace." Jake moved to the communication console, his hands shaking slightly as he activated the channel. "This is Private Jake Martinez of the Colonial Defense Force," he said. "I am aboard a Velkari vessel as a guest, not a prisoner. We are requesting permission to approach the archaeological site in Sector 7 for peaceful research purposes." The response came after a tense minute of silence. "Martinez, this is Captain Lisa Grant of the patrol ship Horizon. You are ordered to power down the alien vessel immediately and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply, we will open fire." Jake looked at Zarakai, whose scales had shifted to a worried purple color. "They're not going to listen," he said. "We need to leave now before they attack." Zarakai shook her head. "If we flee, they will only confirm their suspicions that I am holding you hostage," she said. "You must convince them, soldier. This is our only chance." Jake activated the comm again. "Captain Grant, I know how this looks, but I'm telling you the truth. Queen Zarakai has information that could end this war. We need access to that site to prove it. I'm asking you to trust me." Another long pause. Then Captain Grant's voice came through again. "Jake, I've read your service record. You're a good soldier, but you're asking me to let an enemy vessel approach a secured site based on nothing but your word. Give me one good reason why I should take that risk." Jake thought desperately, trying to find the right words. "Because, Captain," he said finally, "I've spent the last 3 days with Queen Zarakai, and in that time she's shown me more kindness and respect than some of my own commanding officers. She healed my wounds, shared her supplies, and told me things about her people that make me question everything we've been told about this war. I'm not saying you should trust her completely, but I am saying she deserves a chance. To prove herself, I'm willing to stake my life on it." The silence stretched even longer this time. Finally, Captain Grant spoke. "All right, Martinez, you've got your chance. But understand this. My weapons will remain locked on that vessel the entire time you're at the site. One wrong move and I will not hesitate to destroy you both. Understood, Captain Jake said, relief flooding through him. Thank you. Zarakai's scales had shifted to a grateful gold as she guided the ship down to the planet's surface. The ancient site was located in a valley surrounded by human military installations, making Jake understand why Zarakai couldn't have approached alone. They landed near a structure that looked similar to the chamber Jake had discovered in the caves, but much larger and more intact. Captain Grant was waiting for them with a full security detail, all weapons trained on Zarakai as she emerged from the ship. The captain was a stern woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked at Jake first. You better be right about this, Martinez, she said. Then she turned to Zarakai. Queen Zarakai, I'm told you have information that could end the war. You have 1 hour to prove it. Zarakai bowed her head respectfully, her scales showing the purple of deference to authority. I am grateful for this opportunity. Captain, she said, I will not waste your time. She led them into the ancient structure, moving with confidence through corridors that seemed to respond to her presence. The walls lit up as she passed, revealing more pictographs and symbols. Jake, Captain Grant, and the security team followed, keeping weapons ready. Finally, they entered a central chamber dominated by a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with inner light. Zarakai approached the crystal and placed her hands on its surface. Her scales began to glow, matching the rhythm of the crystal's pulsations. Suddenly, the chamber, filled with light and images, appeared in the air around them. Holographic projections showing scenes from thousands of years in the past. Jake watched in amazement as the images told a story. Humans and Velkari working together, building great cities, exploring the galaxy side by side. Then the images shifted, showing a third species, one that neither Jake nor Zarakai recognized. These beings were insectoid with multiple limbs and segmented bodies. The projections showed these creatures infiltrating both human and Velkari societies, sowing discord and distrust. Then came war. Not between humans and Velkari, but against this third species. The Alliance fought together and eventually drove the insectoid beings from known space. But the cost was terrible. Both species had been nearly destroyed, and in the aftermath they had been forced to retreat to their homeworlds to rebuild. The final images showed a promise. When both species had recovered, they would reunite and continue their alliance. But something had gone wrong. Someone had erased the records, ensured that both species forgot their shared history. The projections faded, leaving the chamber in silence. Captain Grant stared at the crystal, her face pale. This is impossible. She whispered, we would know. If something like this had happened, our historical records would show it. Zarakai's scales were a somber blue. Both our peoples lost much knowledge during the war against the harvesters, she said. That is what the insectoid species called themselves. They fed on conflict, using advanced technology to manipulate other species into destroying each other. When we drove them away, we thought we had won, but they left behind seeds of mistrust, seeds that have now grown into this new war. Jake felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. So our current war, he said, it's all based on a lie. Zarakai nodded. I believe the harvesters or their descendants have returned. She said, they manipulated both our governments into believing the other side attacked. First, they want us to destroy each other to finish what they started thousands of years ago. Captain Grant holstered her weapon, her expression conflicted. This is beyond my authority, she said, even if I believe what I've seen here, and I'm not sure I do this. Information needs to reach the highest levels of government. Both governments, Zarakai agreed, which is why I propose an alliance, Captain. You help me present this evidence to the human leadership, and I will do the same with the Council of Queens. Together we can expose the truth and end this war before more lives are lost. The captain looked at Jake, who nodded. I believe her, Captain. He said, I've seen enough to know she's telling the truth. Captain Grant took a deep breath. This is going to start a political firestorm, she said. But I think you're right. The truth needs to come out. She activated her comm. This is Captain Grant to all ships in the sector. I'm declaring a temporary ceasefire and requesting immediate contact with Central Command, tell them we have information of critical importance regarding the origin of the Velkari conflict. Over the next several weeks, Jake found himself at the center of events he never could have imagined. He and Zarakai traveled to Earth accompanied by Captain Grant and a diplomatic escort. The journey was tense, with many in the human military skeptical of Zarakai's motives, but the evidence from the ancient site was undeniable, and slowly minds began to change. On Earth, they presented their findings to the Global Defense Council. The revelation that humanity had once been allied with the Velkari caused shockwaves throughout the government. Investigations were launched, examining the events that had triggered the war 3 years earlier. What they discovered was disturbing communication intercepts that had supposedly proven Velkari aggression had been fabricated. Supply ships that had been attributed to Velkari raiders had actually been attacked by vessels of unknown origin. Someone had very carefully engineered the conflict, making each side believe the other had struck first. Meanwhile, Zarakai returned to the Velkari Empire with her own evidence. She faced fierce opposition from older queens, who were reluctant to trust humans, but she persisted, sharing the historical records and pointing out the inconsistencies in the official account of the war's beginning. Slowly, her message began to spread. Young warriors started questioning the conflict. Scientists examined the evidence and confirmed its authenticity. The tide of opinion began to turn. Jake remained on Earth during this time, serving as a liaison between human military command and Zarakai's representatives. He found the work exhausting but rewarding. For the first time since the war began, he felt like he was making a real difference. He also found himself thinking about Zarakai, constantly wondering how she was managing with her own people. He had grown to respect the alien queen during their time together, and he realized with some surprise that he missed her company. 6 months after their initial meeting, a joint conference was arranged on a neutral space station. Representatives from both species gathered to discuss the possibility of peace. Jake was included in the human delegation, and he felt a surge of emotion when he saw Zarakai enter the conference room. She looked regal in formal crystalline armor, and her scales shimmered with what Jake had learned to recognize as nervous anticipation. Their eyes met across the room, and her scales shifted to a warm gold. The negotiations were difficult. Years of war had created deep wounds on both sides, and many were reluctant to forgive. But the evidence was overwhelming. The harvesters had returned, using more subtle methods than before to pit the younger species against each other. Joint military operations were proposed to hunt down the harvester agents. Trade agreements were discussed to rebuild damaged economies. Cultural exchanges were planned to help both species understand each other better. Jake watched it all with a sense of wonder. What had started with a chance meeting in a cave had somehow grown into something world-changing. On the final night of the conference, Jake found Zarakai standing alone on an observation deck looking out at the stars. He approached slowly, not wanting to intrude. "Your people did well today," he said quietly. Zarakai glanced at him, her scales shifting to a soft blue. "As did yours," she replied. "Perhaps there is hope for our alliance after all." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Jake spoke again. "What will you do now?" he asked. "When this is all over?" Zarakai's scales rippled with complex colors. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have spent so long focused on this goal that I have not thought beyond it. And you, soldier, what will you do?" Jake shrugged. "Probably go back to being nobody special," he said, with a slight smile. "Just a regular guy trying to figure out life in peacetime." Zarakai turned to face him. "Fully, you are not nobody, Jake Martinez," she said seriously. "You showed kindness to an enemy when you had every reason to kill me. You trusted me when trust was dangerous. You helped me change the course of history. That makes you quite extraordinary, by any measure." Jake felt his face flush. "I just did what seemed right," he said. "You made it easy." Zarakai's scales shifted to that unusual pinkish color that Jake had seen once before. "May I tell you something in confidence?" she asked. "Sure," Jake said. Zarakai seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "Among my people," she began, "there is a phenomenon that occurs rarely but is well documented in our history. Sometimes a Velkari will meet another being of any species and experience what we call catharit, means soul recognition. The understanding that this other being is meant to be part of your life in a significant way. Jake's heart began to beat faster. What are you saying? He asked. Zarakai looked directly at him, her eyes luminous. I am saying that, from the moment I saw you in those caves studying the pictographs with such genuine curiosity, I felt Cathara. I knew you were important, though I did not understand why at the time. That color, Jake said, pointing to the pink scales on her neck. What? Does it really mean Zarakai's scales deepened in color? It means affection, she said quietly. The kind that grows between beings who have bonded deeply. It is rare for it to appear between different species, but not unheard of in our ancient records. Jake took a step closer. I'm not going to pretend I fully understand what you're telling me, he said. But I do know that these past months I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, about the time we spent together, about everything you've taught me. Zarakai's scales brightened to a brilliant gold. Then perhaps, she said, we should explore what this connection means, not today while everything is still uncertain, but when the peace is established, when both our peoples have had time to adjust. Perhaps then we could meet again as equals seeking to understand each other better. Jake smiled. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. Zarakai reached out slowly, giving Jake time to pull away if he wanted. Her hand was warm despite the scaled surface, and when she touched his arm, gently he felt a slight tingle of energy. In my culture, she said, this is how we express trust and affection. Physical contact without pretense or fear. Jake covered her hand with his own. In my culture too, he said. The moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps as Captain Grant approached. Sorry to interrupt, she said, though her expression suggested she wasn't sorry at all, but we've just received word that the Council of Queens has officially accepted the peace terms. The war is over. Jake and Zarakai looked at each other and then back at the captain. Both of them were smiling. The formal peace treaty was signed 2 weeks later, in a ceremony broadcast across both human and Velkari territories. Jake stood with the human delegation watching, as leaders from both species put their marks on the historic document. When it was done, there was no cheering or celebration. The moment was too solemn, too weighted with the memory of all who had been lost. But there was hope that both species could build something better together than they ever could apart. Hope that the lessons of the past would guide them toward a brighter future. In the months that followed, Jake found himself assigned to a new role as part of the Joint Cultural Exchange program. He traveled to Velkari worlds, helping humans understand the alien culture and helping Velkari understand humanity. It was challenging work, but deeply rewarding. And every few weeks he would receive a message from Zarakai updating him on her own work helping to rebuild the alliance. Her messages were always thoughtful and personal, and Jake treasured each one. A year after the peace treaty, Jake was invited to attend a ceremony on the Velkari homeworld. He accepted immediately, curious to see where Zarakai had grown up. The planet was stunning, with vast crystal formations that caught the light of 3 suns and transformed it into rainbow cascades. Zarakai met him at the spaceport, and Jake was struck once again by her presence. You came, she said, her scales bright with happiness. Of course, Jake replied, I wouldn't miss this. The ceremony was a traditional Velkari bonding ritual. Jake learned young queens were formally recognized by the council and given their first territories to govern. But what surprised Jake was when Zarakai asked him to stand with her during the ceremony. Among my people, she explained, it is customary for a queen to be supported by those who have proven their loyalty and worth. You saved my life, Jake. Martinez, you believed in my mission when no one else would. It would honor me to have you present. Jake stood beside her as the ceremony unfolded. He understood little of the formal language being spoken, but he could feel the weight and importance of the moment. When it was over, Zarakai turned to him with scales gleaming gold. Walk with me, she said. She led him away from the crowds to a cliff overlooking a vast crystal valley. The view was breathtaking, and Jake stood in silence, taking it all in. Zarakai stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his. I have a confession to make, she said after a moment. What's that? Jake asked. When I first saw you in those caves, she said, I knew who you were. I had been tracking your ship's crash, and I came to those caves, specifically to find you. Jake turned to look at her, surprised. Why, he asked. Zarakai's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue. Because the crystals told me to. She said, they showed me visions of a human soldier who would help me find the truth, a soldier who would prove that our species could trust each other again. I did not know it would be you specifically, but I knew someone would come. So when I found you studying those ancient pictographs with such genuine interest, I knew the crystals had guided me correctly. Jake processed this information, so our meeting wasn't as random as I thought, he said. No, Zarakai admitted, but everything that followed was genuine. I did not know if I could trust you when we first met. I did not know if you would help me or try to kill me. I took a risk because I believed in the possibility of peace, and you proved that my belief was justified. She turned to face him fully. Over this past year, I have thought often about Cathara, she said, about what it means to recognize someone as fundamentally important to your life. And I have come to understand that what I feel for you goes beyond simple affection or gratitude. Jake felt his pulse quicken. Zarakai continued, her voice soft but steady. My culture. When a queen feels Cathara for another being, it is understood as a gift from the crystals themselves, a recognition that this connection will make both beings stronger and better. I do not know how such a relationship would work between our species. There are no recent precedents to follow, but I know that I want to try if you are willing. Jake reached out and took her hand. Feeling that same tingle of energy. I'm willing, he said. I don't know how it will work either, but these past months, without you, have felt incomplete somehow, like I left something important unfinished. I want to see where this goes. Zarakai's scales blazed with brilliant gold light. Then we will discover it together, she said. The path forward will not be easy, or peoples are at peace, but there is still distrust. There will be those who question our connection, who see it as inappropriate or dangerous. But I believe that if we can make this work, we can show both our species that the alliance can be more than just political convenience. We can show them that true understanding and respect between humans and Velkari is possible. Jake smiled. No pressure, then, he said, with gentle humor. Zarakai's scales flickered with the color Jake had learned indicated amusement. We have already helped end a war, she said. Surely we can manage a relationship. They stood together on that cliff, watching as the three suns set over the Crystal Valley. Jake thought about the impossible journey that had brought him here. A crash landing that should have killed him. A chance meeting with an alien queen in ancient caves. A conspiracy that had nearly destroyed two species. And now this connection he never could have imagined with someone from a completely different world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jake knew he wanted to face them with Zarakai by his side. The human soldier had shown kindness to the alien queen, and her response had been to change both their lives forever. In the years that followed, Jake and Zarakai became symbols of the new alliance between humans and Velkari. Their relationship faced scrutiny and criticism from both species, but they persevered. They learned each other's languages and customs. They traveled together, promoting understanding and cooperation. They faced down the remaining Harvester agents who tried to reignite the war. And slowly, through their example, others began to follow. More humans and Velkari formed friendships and partnerships. Mixed crews began serving on joint ships. Children of both species learned about each other's cultures in school. The ancient alliance was reborn stronger than before because now it was built on genuine understanding rather than just political necessity. Jake often thought back to that moment in the caves, when he had decided to trust Zarakai. It had seemed like such a small choice at the time, but that single act of kindness to an enemy had changed the course of history, proving that sometimes the